Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Weaver. This is Bill Henderson, who has joined me for the next installment of this series of crafting videos that I've been making. Bill, you've been on Lighthouse faculty for a long time.
I've been on the faculty for 20 years.
Mhm.
When I started at Lighthouse, there were like 4 of us, maybe 5.
So
Now I can't even keep track of who works there anymore. I have no idea.
there's a lot. So Bill also runs the book project for Lighthouse, which is a 2-year project. And he is going to be teaching at LitFest, our very first virtual LitFest, correct?
Yes.
So I have a big question for you, Bill, today. My question is, how do I know when I'm done?
Done with your book? Or just generally done?
I always feel ready to be done with my book before it's actually done.
Yeah. Now, when you say done, do you mean like finding the ending, or do you mean that it's really done, that you can hand it off?
No, I mean like finished. Like I am ready to start querying agents. I'm ready to,
Oh, okay.
how do I know how do I gauge when I've done all the necessary steps? I think this is something that comes up for me. This is something that comes up for a lot of my students. So how would you advise someone who's maybe
Okay.
in that realm of
Yeah.
sure?
I thought we were going to talk, this is fine. I thought we were going to talk about how you write the ending of your book, or that you know that you've reached the ending of it. But actually, what I'm going to talk about has to do with knowing that you're done with your book. So I will talk toward an ending and then talk about how I think you know that it's done.
Okay.
So with any book, you have certain questions that you're asking. The questions that you're interested in yourself and questions that your character is interested, questions/issues that they're interested in exploring. And you put together your book in a way to explore those questions and to test those questions or those issues against your character, so that when you know what your book is about, you begin to know what to include and what to exclude, because every part of the book on every page is a sort of a fragment or a shard of what that core question is in your book. So one of the things that you're working toward to finish it is to make sure that you've tightened it up enough that every page is sort of doing the work that it needs to do to explore that core question. You can raise a bunch of questions throughout a book. You don't have to answer them all. And that's what keeps us reading, and also what makes for a good ending, is that not everything is tied up tightly. So when I'm writing, I like to have an ending in mind so that I have something to aim for. And it's not like it's something sort of vague, but it has sort of an emotional impact that I write down. It has a location and who is there. I'm not actually writing the end, but I want to have a sense of like, where is this going to end up? I've never actually written the ending that I had in mind, but along the way, it really helps me make choices about what should go in the book and what shouldn't, because I have sort of an emotional location that I'm aiming for. Then I always end the book as I'm writing. I always end the book before I reach the end before I think I was going to. I remember each time I finished a book, I remember where I was sitting writing that day, and I write the end. And I say, oh God, that's the end. And I had all this plot that I was going to continue writing, and realized at that point, I had answered enough, not all, of the questions that I could let go of the story. Now, then you have sort of a full draft. You know what the endpoints are. So to answer your question, then what do you do to make sure that it's actually done? Well, now you know what you have. You have the sort of the bookends of the book, and you probably have a much better sense of what the book is about. You have a sense of what the questions are because you know what some of the answers are. And then you do that final draft, let's say one draft or 20, where you tighten it all up. You tighten it all up and you get it all in the right order, raising questions, answering questions when necessary, putting in the backstory when we absolutely have to have it and not too soon, those kinds of things. You get sort of it all balanced. One of the things I like to think about with a book or a chapter or anything is get in late and get out early. That's one of the things that I learned a long time ago, I don't know, grad school, where we would look at a chapter and the professor would move up on the final page to the place that opens towards something instead of closing the end of the chapter. And that's what I would like to think about endings in books, is they open. When you turn the page, the story continues in your mind. It hasn't been shut down, it's been opened. So that you can let go of the character at that point and imagine them moving on through their lives with a different sense of who they are. Not necessarily positive or negative, but it just sort of echoes for you. And we've all read books like that you turn the page and they just sort of live in your existence. And other books where it's so tied up that you think, well, that's it. There's nothing else to think about. Right. So I like to get in late, which means the latest possible place where you can hit the core action of your story, and get out early, which is not try to tie it up, but try to sort of move back into what you thought the plot was, to find that moment that sort of opens us toward something else. Because sometimes I think that people, they don't trust that we will just love their story. They have to make sure that we know what the point is. And I think you can answer as many questions as you need to, or as few as you need to, and then just let go of it. That's all I have to say.
I think
That's the end.
Really good point, which is, you really can't do that final tightening until you have a solid sense of what those shards are that are making up the full picture, right? I think when I started writing way back when I was a student in your class, I had this sense that, well, if I've written it, 10 times, then I must be close to the end, right? But especially in those first drafts of my first novel, I think I was spending all of that time still figuring out what those pieces were that were moving me towards the story I wanted to tell. And that was very confusing to me, I think, as an early writer, mostly because I didn't understand my book well enough to understand what that big picture thing was, so that then I could make all the decisions about the individual pieces that are working as a whole, this whole book. Like, I kept trying to go to those final drafting stages before I understood how each piece added to the whole.
Right. So each time you go then through a draft and you have a much better sense of it, it changes what you're going to do to the draft. Like recently I finished a book and I hadn't really read through it and looked through it and cut 40,000 words out of it, which is like a whole book. And then sent that to my new agent, and he had some ideas. He wanted me to cut apart a certain frame that was elsewhere and keep the frame in the main location. And he wanted me to raise a couple of stakes, because I guess people think I'm a quiet writer, which means not enough people get shot. I don't know. So I raised some of the sort of surface action, but in the process, because his comments were good and because I took enough time to think about what they meant for me, what I wanted to do for the book, I could work my way through from beginning to end, seeing very clearly now what could be cut, those things that have been sitting there forever, that were no longer about that one core thing, because I used to have a different frame, and so there were different reasons for backstory. So I cut all that, and I reached a certain point where I realized that in order to get the pieces in order and the dramatic arc in order, I was missing a chapter. And at the end of 10 years of writing a book, you realize you're missing a chapter, but that's a positive because you actually have each draft, you have a better sense of where you're headed. So when I was done with it and I sent it to him, I had to write a new ending because it had to match the new opening frame. And that ending, there are different ways to do endings, and I think it was Amanda Ray who had taught a class, and she said one of them is just to sort of mirror your opening. It's sort of a similar length and a similar movement. So I took my opening and then I just wrote next to it my ending with the same kinds of paragraphs, the same kinds of movements, but with a radically different sense of what has happened to the character because of everything that happened in between. And I think it worked.
Now it's perfect.
Now it's perfect. That's the thing, is it'll never, like, when is it ready to go? When you feel like you've made enough choices on every page that every page is doing what it has to do and there's no extraneous material. Of course, there will be some, nothing's perfect, but that sense that, like, I know why this has to be there and I know why this has to be cut. I think that would be your ending point.
Mm-hmm.
And have a reader. Do you have a reader?
Mm-hmm.
And people at Lighthouse will read your book too.
Okay, well, thank you. I feel
You're
like
welcome.
you did answer my question. I think it's one of those things that I just struggle with a lot, and I see a lot of my students struggling with too. I think we also just get impatient, right? We just
Completely.
we're ready for it to be done after 10 years.
Well, people will, they get desperate to publish and they get desperate to send the book out before it's ready, and that's a real issue. So you just take the time. You just have to breathe deeply. Take another draft, show it to somebody, and then you're okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate you letting me ask my questions.
Thank you, Rachel. This was very nice.
All right.
Bye.